I'm going to let these three kind people introduce themselves, so I'll start with Todd.
Sure. Hey, I'm Todd Bourne. I am with MacArthur Capital and now currently the CEO at Alpen Group. So my background comes from 30 plus years into private equity. Prior to entering the cannabis space in private equity and venture capital, my firm has managed about $4 billion in assets. And then about 10 years ago, we made a shift into US cannabis. We've deployed between 5 funds that I'm involved with about 220 million US dollars. Those have been about, let's call it 30 some odd companies, invested over 5 funds. We raised capital from 100,000 a person to $1 million a person. So it was a grind. 220 million in the US space was a lot of work to gather those assets. I will say we were very well known for a transaction that we had where MacArthur put about $3.5 million into 2 companies that we merged into Form Factory. We sold and had an exit with that company in less than 12 months for $160 million. Subsequently, our investors quite happy with those returns, but in the end, we have pushed all our chips in now and are focusing on Europe, the growth of Europe, the opportunities globally. Alpen Group, we consider ourselves an MCO, a multi-country operator, versus MSO, LP, et cetera. So that's my background.
Joel?
Joel Redelman. So I worked was a founding partner of Redfield Group, so we're an alternative investment fund. Always looked at emerging markets, the tech space, cannabis space, anything which was a little bit on the edge at the time, and now really focused on Promethean Biopharma, which is our cannabis play, and we've really focused on drug development, efficacy, and how we can deliver a better product and better access to patients.
Hi everyone, Jara DeCarcer. I'm the founder of New Frontier Data, leading data analytics and collecting information collection firm in the United States, covering the cannabis industry worldwide. Founding member of C-Trust, currently introducing the first investment credit rating and scoring and monitoring solution, specific assessing exposure and overall risk in the cannabis industry. I also sit on the board of On Carbon, which is a company out of India that is doing research, looking to understand the applications of carbonization of hemp for industrial application. That's kind of why I asked the question I asked earlier. And my background is really in data collection, analytics, and fintech, which I now apply to cannabis.
Well, thank you, y'all. I think I'm going to start with capital has always been feast or famine in this industry, and so how can operators be more proactive in trying to seek capital and provide investors with the knowledge that they know so they can make investments into these companies?
I'll kick off with that. I wish we at least had a famine in capital right now. This is probably one of the most difficult environments I've seen to raise capital for this industry. And thus for us, that's why we've deployed a lot of our own personal capital into what the project we're doing right now. What I'm seeing though is also, let's call it just from the fund level and the investor base level, the US, and let's just call it all North American investors have run for the hills. It's just been a complete disaster what's happened in the US. And I'm talking about not bad companies in a bad environment. I'm talking about good operators with a lot of demand and tons of sales completely implode because of a lack of banking, proper federal guidance, regulation, et cetera. So when it comes to capital, now let me just be the investor versus an operator for a second, as someone that's probably vetted and done due diligence on 500 companies, maybe more than that, across all of the sectors that cannabis has to offer. What I see right now happening here in Europe is the actual right way to build an industry where capital markets can go into it versus, let's call it, a gold rush mentality. The US and Canada was a complete gold rush mentality. No realization of real valuations, all of that. Due diligence. I mean, I remember the first deal I ever looked at, let's call it from the capital space, I got a shoebox full of receipts, and I thought I hit the gold mine for due diligence. I mean, now we really are putting together a structure and a marketplace that can be global, in a sense, ex-US and ex-Canada, of how does really the market start to develop here. So capital is brutal out there, but truly the opportunity that we see for massive multiple X really is here now versus what happened in the US and North America. You would look at companies and valuations where you'd walk in the door and see a $250 million valuation, pre-revenue. That's all gone. So I think the opportunity that we have in this difficult market is where the real winners will happen. That's my opinion.
Yeah, but is capital really being brutal, or is it just asking the questions which it should have asked in the first place? Why are you raising money again and again and again without delivering on what you said you'd deliver the first time? Why are you turning over $1 billion but you're not profitable? If you can't run a business sustainably, then of course capital is going to run away to an industry where businesses can be run sustainably. And Europe has an opportunity now to learn from the mistakes from America and for people to build businesses which are sustainable. Like, as an investor, when you look at things, don't you say, well, what's this money going to get you to? Is this, and when you talk to a founder and all they say is to the next capital raise, well, that's just not good enough, right? Business owners need to understand that they need sustainable businesses, and that's what will keep the money flowing, and that's what will keep things consistent like that. And money will come back to cannabis, but cannabis operators need to prove that they can run businesses.
The gold rush, the green rush is over. Just operate like a proper business. Like, the industry is maturing. Germany is tightened up. Again, I expect that things will be transparent and sophisticated and reported and operated in a proper business manner. I think that's pretty much it.
I think that's spot on. I mean, if you really think about it, that whole gold rush mentality, green rush mentality, we might not be sitting here today had that not happened. In reality, because really then it was all, in a sense, illicit market and so forth. But the problems that's continuing to go on is really the economies that are built in place right now continue to fester for the illicit market, continue to fill the coffers of really the cartels, really versus the businesses. And Joel, what you said, I think is spot on. When you operate businesses as a business, forget cannabis, just as a business, as a private equity investor for 30 plus years, that's exactly what you have to do. And so in reality, all of that gold rush and mentality and green rush that happened, we probably wouldn't be here. We'd probably just still be in the illicit markets. So in a sense, we can thank that, but all the dumping of that capital, and I mean just irresponsible dumping of capital, you have to go into opportunities now in an asset-like mentality. So when we look at opportunities, we look at those opportunities are they sustainable? What's the path to profitability? What's the path to, let's call it even revenue to profitability? Wouldn't you agree?
And why isn't it profitable now?
Yep.
What they said.
So, Giada, you were sort of going back to regulation and that. How can these companies benefit from smart regulation and that lead to investors being able to look at the industry that way? I know you're working on sort of what your project is working on with C-Trust, but...
So yes, as part of what C-Trust is trying to do, I don't know if I would say regulation, but we're certainly trying to introduce and improve on standards. Standards by which we assess risk and investment opportunity in sort of a more transparent, quantifiable manner, in a more sophisticated, business-like manner. But if we take that up, a level above, beyond just due diligence and financial assessment of risk, how can regulations help? I mean, how much time do we have? The issue, I think, is not how much can they help. The issue is how do we even get close to have an environment, given that the industry is a global industry, whereby those regulations really do help to continue to foster good business growth and international business growth in the cannabis industry. I'm not really sure I have an answer to that. I have a lot of hopes and dreams, though.
Yeah, I think when you look at it holistically, you can really get lost in the argument between adult use, recreational, medicinal, and everything else, whereas the question we really need to be asking is, do the patients or the users that need the product have access to it? And ultimately, within the self-medicating market or the recreational market, whatever you'd like to call them, they're really quasi-medical users. They are medical users, and they're not. Whether they're not familiar with the term that they're a medical user and they call themselves a recreational user, it's really by the by. But the increasing medicalization within markets is a path to getting access to the people that need it without running into the pitfalls of the current regulatory environment with UN laws and everything else.
So a major difference, and I will say, the fact of coming, let's call it, from the U.S. markets and now being completely all in our fund, and it makes no more investments really into the U.S. marketplace unless it's more of a global type of investment, so what we see what's happening here. The real reality is, optimistically, the dollars and cents are enormous. That's not the issue. The issue that the companies are having, and I always go back to, it's very easy to point the fingers and say, oh, well, bad operators, spending too much money, we're unrealistic. No, not necessarily. Way ahead. First mover, David, you mentioned that. First mover is not where you wanted to be, especially in the markets. And now if you're looking at what's happening here in, let's call it Europe, but I really look at it more globally. That's great, Germany, Switzerland, whatever. This is a global marketplace, ex-US, because the US market is really a disaster, and you can't even ship across a state line, let alone a country line. So, the real reality is now, you look at the tremendous financial opportunity is here, how do you build it? And what I think is going right here is really the slowing down versus racing in, and all of a sudden, you have a marketplace that's there that isn't ready for it, and then it gets overbuilt, and then things get pulled back, and then the taxation kicks in and so forth. This is a slow, methodical approach that's happening here in Europe, and I'm very, very bullish on it. So, you got to go in very light and slow, so to say, but if you do that, the market will build itself. Market efficiency is 101 when it comes to us in the financial world. It's an efficient marketplace, but with that efficient marketplace, we know that the clients are there. We know that the use is there, whether it be a medical, one-day recreational, it's one-day recreational. So I'm tremendously bullish on it, but you're going to see a lot of battle scars from companies that are just not ready and prepared for the marketplace.
So cannabis borders have always been pretty sticky as far as what people expect. And what do you think we can do to improve that in the cannabis industry?
I think it goes back to my previous point about the medicalization of the cannabis market. And if you can create a framework whereby the medical market can expand, the cross-border regulations there are then facilitated through pharmaceutical agreements rather than through narcotics agreements. And that's a path that's easier at the moment.
When you say borders is sticky, can you elaborate on that? Because I'm thinking of how we use that term in the US.
Yeah, obviously, I think it's the free flow of goods, right, doesn't occur in the U.S. for that. Other than the illicit market, right?
Right, so you're talking about the legal market.
Right, yeah.
I think Europe has a great opportunity to actually have, let's call it interstate trade, that the United States hasn't been able to do or take advantage of because of the fragmented regulatory environment. However, I don't know that Europe as a whole has figured out what exactly it's all supposed to look like as a region in terms of their overall role and their expertise, and how do they want to position in the market in terms of how are they going to be that strength and that niche which is going to be needed. And then within that region, how is each nation that is looking to embrace and sort of move forward with a legal cannabis industry also going to position and bring their own expertise, talent, and niche. So a bit more to do, and as my colleague said, it's a good thing that it's been taken slow and deliberate and thoughtful process is taking place, because there's no point in rushing. And the US and North America has taught us a lot of what not to do, but not necessarily what to do. We're still trying to figure that out.
So to go to your border scenario, and I didn't quite understand the question, so that's why I passed. Now I got it. I don't usually pass on questions often. But no, I think that the issue is the U.S. market, you just have to remember, it's federally illegal still. What happens state by state is kind of almost by the way and accidental. Another reason why we believe in the MCO approach, multi-country operating type approach, is you really have a scenario without borders here. I mean, you really don't. I mean, we don't know how that's ultimately going to lay out because the laws are being written. And if I think a lot of us smart folks in the room can help contribute to how those laws are written, we shouldn't have, let's call it a border scenario. You know, in addition to that, really banking is not an issue here. The big banks are not going to touch it right now because they still do business with US banks that might frown on their ability to bank cannabis. But if you have a free banking scenario, you have a free capital scenario, and you have the ability to move across borders, those laws will be ultimately laid out. We don't have the stigma and the issue of stigma, what's happening in the US. So in reality, it's an open canvas now, but going back to what Giada says, is it's being moved out very slowly, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. We can all be impatient for let's call it, for returns and on our investment. As an investor, this is all about returns on our investment. I mean, if you're an investor out there, you know that. If you're someone raising capital, you know you better know that. So.
I mean, isn't that what the EU was for in the first place?
Right. So going back to that, so what do you think the most important factor in the future is for the sector globally, if that's the case?
Giada, you want to go?
Sure. I thought we were supposed to rehearse these questions ahead of time. That's an excellent question. I mean, I think that's $1 billion question. What is the biggest thing that we can do today on a global scale to help the industry? Well, Shizen. I think the first thing is to realize that it is a global market and it is a global opportunity, and to start from that framework. So whether you are operating locally, or you're an MSO operating interstate, or you're in Europe and you're beginning to think about how you're going to plant your flag in Germany, but then at the same time work in Switzerland, you really need to think like that. You need to realize that it's not just a matter of where you are locally, but that the opportunity and the challenges are going to come from all over the place. More interestingly, to me specifically, and actually recently wrote a little something that maybe worth a little something about it, is that we are beginning to see the emergence of regional expertise across the global industry. Regions really are beginning to sort of develop their own personality and profile as it pertains to what their role is in the whole ecosystem of cannabis. And so maybe it would be valuable for all of us in the industry to, again, think of our own talent and expertise and what can bring to bear, while being very cognizant of what's happening around us at a big macro level, on a global level. My potential 2 cents.
Yeah, and I mean, it's important to we create an environment where the demand can be satisfied. If we all know people want cannabis, the people are out there that want it, but if we don't have an environment where it can be delivered from the grower or the producer all the way down to the patient and the person that wants it, well, then we can make as much cannabis as we want. It's just going to sit and get old in our warehouses. And putting a system in place where the cannabis can be delivered to the people that need it and drive that demand is what's going to drive the sustainability of our businesses.
I agree with both of those comments. I think what I would add to that is this. We have always, let's call it at the MacArthur level at my private equity firm, took the approach of to be very collaborative and to not think that we could either run any one deal by ourselves, take the lead and just do it all by ourselves. And then as we would then do our due diligence on firms to make investments in, who would be the most collaborative? Very difficult to get in the US as you have that border issue. But to me personally, what can now tee up the best opportunity for the largest growth is for this industry here to be a global industry, to be very collaborative. Because, one level of expertise may be coming out of Portugal, another might be coming out of Switzerland, another might be coming out of Germany, another might be coming out of Colombia, South Africa, on and on. How does this industry now collaborate? Because it is one big, huge industry. The difference is it's not just a pure pharma industry. So even, let's call it medical, can still have that approach of how does that ultimately become a recreational or an adult use product, et cetera. I think the collaboration between countries, companies, leaders within the industry will be how this really can be an enormous industry, and it has to be a profitable. I would love to say this is philanthropy. It's not. I mean, there's philanthropy that can come from successful companies where they can then make a contribution to making sure that it's, let's call it, is available to everyone, is available to people that need, et cetera. But if this is not a successful, viable industry, there is nothing to distribute. So at the end of the day, that collaboration, that unified philosophy is what ultimately makes this a successful industry.
Well, I think that's all I have on the question side. Should we turn it over to the audience and see?
Sure.
Yes, let's. All right, let's hear it for the panel. Rocky had his hand up first.
Rocky Petrullo, One World Legends, Colombia. My question is, the title up here, Cannabis Sector to Grow Unbounded, and I think Todd just did a good job about talking about collaboration and, working together, which means to me both ways. Earlier today, we had a panel that was saying, it is what it is, the government's only going to allow Germany to grow in Germany. Well, if we're going to collaborate and we're going to go both ways, if Germany's going to serve France or Sweden, or there's, been a pathogen that's killed most of the product in Italy, is Germany going to work with Italy, or is Germany going to only grow for Germany and not collaborate and market and sell to other countries? So I think, like you said, it's a big global market, which includes, importation from Colombia, as we had a couple of people speak this morning. And I like your approach, Todd. So what do you think? Do you think that to grow unbounded, we need to open these borders? Versus America, which we will get there, but the states had to move forward because the federal government was going to, drag their tail. But now that there's 37 states in America, the next step is the federal laws are going to have to change, and then we'll have interstate commerce.
Yeah, I think you were exactly right. That guy knew what he was talking about. I think you're spot on. It's a global environment. And yes, if anyone's saying it's all just going to be our way and not the other way, that will be the failure that happens all over again. So I think.
But I think what the guys were saying this morning wasn't that we shouldn't collaborate and we should work within our countries. It was saying this is what the government's offering us now. Let's take what we can get now and keep pushing for what we want, rather than saying it's not enough and getting nothing. And those incremental steps help the market grow and develop and build in every place to a point where governments are willing to give more, and they see that the negative effects of the changes in the regulations haven't brought lots of car crashes because people are driving stoned or something else. Once they see that the regulations are working, then they'll be open to more regulations, and we're better off taking what we're offered than saying it's not enough.
No, Joel, I agree with you. I mean, if you think about that, all you can do is work within the framework that you're allowed to do it. No one on stage is going to say we're going to be able to change really that environment. So I agree that you have to work within the framework you have. That being said, it's one of the reasons, and Daniel mentioned it earlier this morning as well, was that's why we are in Switzerland. You know, I mean, we're going to be collaborative with Colombia and markets like that using what we have in place. If you isolate yourself, you're only going to have an isolated marketplace. I mean, it is what it is.
Yeah, and we shouldn't stop lobbying just because we've got a small step. We should all keep pushing.
Right.
Absolutely.
Exactly. Check. Oh, okay. And over here.
Good afternoon, thank you. Thank you. Dirk Bielen, MedTech Pharma from Australia. On the question, what can we do for the global industry to move forward? One of the challenges I believe exists in pretty much every single country is driving under the influence of THC. At this moment in time, we don't have a quantitative test. Is that kind of test not relevant at that moment to start to work as an industry, finding a quantitative test rather than a qualitative test so that people are not afraid of using the product and with the risk of losing jail or losing their license, driving license that is?
First of all, studies show that stoners are better drivers than regular people. The old joke
They
is
drive
that
slower, correct?
well, the old joke is that a drunk person will drive right through the stop sign, but the stoner will wait for the stop sign to turn green.
Yeah, I think these strikes a deeper chord there, which relates to the misdesign of cities ever since the invention of the automobile.
Here. Everything is everything. Yeah, what can we do about that? I mean, Washington State has tried to have a default driving under the influence law, so if you have 5 nanograms in your bloodstream, they can try to charge you with driving under the influence. But, I mean, I have 5 nanograms in my bloodstream just when I wake up in the morning. So, I mean, is there... Is that a thing where it's like an education thing where we have to just educate people that...
Well, it is, but say like Australia is a terrible example because it was only a month or two ago there was a fellow that was pulled over and he was stoned and the police told him not to drive and he got back in the car and then T-boned someone and killed 5 people. And so it's not just given THC a bad name in that situation, but it's really changed the public discourse.
Was he just on THC or was he on other things as well?
I believe he was on a number of other things.
Yeah,
but that's not what's published in the headline. THC is what's published in the headline, and if people aren't responsible, then they'll just ban everything.
You all were highlighting how difficult the regulatory environment is in the United States, and Todd, I think you said for that reason that you don't invest any capital in the U.S.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. And my question is, do you see that changing in the near future? And what I mean is, I'm from California, for instance, which, you know, arguably has the most difficult regulatory environment of any place in the United States. And by virtue of that, a lot of those first movers, as you were discussing, are now distressed. And so there's a theory that, you know, second movers might come in and consolidate that market as the regulatory environment gets more favorable. And they'll want people like you, right, to be investing capital in
You just gave away my secret. No, you're spot on. I mean, really, the distressed assets that are coming in the U.S. and the consolidation of the industry and the players, you're spot on. And when I say we're not investing in the U.S., it's because I think there's still a lot more of blood in the streets before it's time to go in there. But again, there are great operators there. So, I mean, California has some of the best operators in the globe. I'd hate to pay those taxes and the state taxes and all the and the 280E and all that stuff. That's going to change. There's going to be that tipping point of when that opportunity is there distressed to then boom back. So no, I think you're spot on. I agree with you.
If I may add to that, it's true that the regulatory environment, a change or a shift for the better in the regulatory environment would absolutely support struggling businesses. But I think that it's all, at the end of the day, it's all about increasing transparency and visibility into the industry and the operator and the businesses. It really comes down to that. So whether it is catalyzed by regulation or just better operation by the businesses. I mean, we're in the business of distressed assets. We realize that there are a lot of businesses out there that are struggling, and what we do is we come in and we do what a doctor does. We give them a bill of health. We tell them, here's your pain point, and these are your symptoms, but this is the disease, and this is what you need to do to get better. And then if you get better, your medicine is going to be more capital, and then you're going to survive. I mean, so I think I'm not saying the regulation is not critical. I mean, I'm all about, let's have federal regulation and federal standard around everything, packaging, dosing, like transparency, visibility. But I think we also need to take ownership and responsibility and accountability to how we've been operating businesses in the cannabis industry as well. And I think it's time to raise the bar.
Fantastic. What do they say? The early bird gets the worm, the second mouse gets the cheese.
Profound. My question is primarily to the money allocators. Can you hear me? Yeah, you got me. It's to the money allocators on the stage. What psychology? This is probably quite a pipe dream for Europe at the moment. But if Europe really does this right and takes off in the right direction, what's the right psychology for operators with money allocators saying, "Hey, we want to pile in now"? Because you guys have seen that in the past. What do you want to see from operators saying, "Hey, no, that's too big. We won't take your money"? Because that's a very difficult one as a CEO of a company, say, "Hey, I don't want your money. I'm good where I'm at." So just maybe some perspectives on that, please.
Yeah, I'll hit that super quick because I think that's the tipping point and the great question. I think all the people that kind of came in and with a rush to too much capital, too quick, overbuilt the marketplace before there was even a marketplace. So as looking, and again, I mean, I'm putting my own money, my partners, we're putting our own money into this company, but at the end of the day, very asset light, not over allocating to size, to marketplace, et cetera, knowing who the client is today, and let's call it who it's going to be a year and maybe 2 years from now. 10 years from now, it's going to look completely different. Also phasing your way in. I've seen so many, okay, all we need to do is raise $20 million. And yeah, okay, good luck. What are the phases that you can go in? Do I need $1 million here, $3 million here, and 5? And Joel, not to the, and I'm going back and raising all the time, but phasing in to that stage of profitability. Okay, we've got this, we're now moving with it. Now phase 2 will kick in, or phase 3 will kick in.
Yeah, and how many times have you seen a company say, "Oh, we need $5 million to build out a facility"? So, well, have you not thought about using a contract manufacturer? Have you not thought of someone else's facility that already exists? Like, why are we building another facility? Or we need $1 million to buy this machine. So, well, did you look in the auctions to see if there's if there's a liquidator selling one? Did you look for a second-hand one? Did you look about leasing it? Did you look of there's all these things, and if you focus on, like Todd said, asset light, expense light, keeping your costs low, then in lean times the business survives. If you're overloaded with costs, then when lean times come, that's when it just gets out of control.
If I may add a very macro level sort of comment, we've spent the past 6 months interviewing investors, lenders, and creditors to understand. Well, I'm not a creditor, investor, or lender, but we did spend some time talking to them because we wanted to understand. What is it that that turns you off when you look at an investment, or what's making what's about performing loan for you? What's that pain point? Where does it stem from? And actually, what we found out was that it was a lot of disappointment, let's call it, with governance and management. A lot of it, no matter what the symptom was, that it came back up to bad management. And I know that sounds sort of like a duh, but there you have it. That's what we literally did, a survey, and that was the outcome of it.
Yeah, a great one. I like to see your founders like putting lots of photos of people in decks, so the investor they think the investor sees it. Oh, we're a big business. We're going to grow bigger. We're doing everything else, but investors look at that and they say, "There's too much cost in this." You have to be realistic about who you are, realistic about where you're going, realistic about forecasts, and realistic about how you're actually going to make money. And it's not by getting a good valuation next round and selling some shares down. What about when the investors get overheated?
Go overheated.
Sell it.
Hi, I think one of the biggest mistakes we've made as an industry is, and I keep reminding people that this is not just an agricultural industry. You know, that is obviously the source of where it begins, but you have to build a full supply chain. And I think there was a lot of obviously overcapitalization in big farms because it was just completely driven by metrics, which in the beginning looked fantastic. Have you seen, we obviously know that's changed, have you seen a shift in where money is being spent to develop the supply chain? Has there been a shift in the culture of that deployment of capital?
So that's funny because it's almost instinctive and intuitive that the capital comes in and goes in to the front end always first, because without that, there's really no product. However, you're right, the back end, the last yard of the field, let's call it the distribution cycle, et cetera, you know, that's usually where the least capital goes into, and it's the most important part of the chain. And I have not seen that change really here. You know, everyone's banking on the fact that it really will be a pharma distribution model. It'll go into the pharmacies. It's a medical product, so that distribution is in place. I'm not necessarily convinced that that's the scenario, but I agree that's what happens is the capital seems to come in on the front end, and it's very, very light on the back end.
I think we've seen some further investment in technology, and whether it's through delivery systems or engineered products and things like that, because there's a culture thing for you within the recreational market, that people within that market really do like flower. But beyond that, in a medical market, doctors and patients are looking for repeatability, for consistency, for dosage limits, things like that, and the technologies that can improve the API, improve the onset, improve the pharmacokinetics. We're seeing investment in that, and we're seeing new products come to the market, which you could describe as third generation, fourth generation, fifth generation, and these are products which have the ability to shape the medical market of the future.
I full-heartedly second that. Not only that, we're seeing some innovation of technology that has been tested in the cannabis industry and has been applied outside of the cannabis industry due to this driving interest, exactly what you said, to increase sort of repeatability, to have more transparency, scalability. So yes, I would totally agree with that.
Yeah, like we've developed a cannabis tablet that we're running a clinical trial with in Australia at the moment, which is a sublingual. Comes in a bottle, doctor says 2 tablets under the tongue, and it's taken the guesswork out of oils, taken the measuring out, taken the unpredictability of your spoon out of it, and it's improved the onset, improved the pharmacokinetics, and we're getting great feedback from patients. And is that going to be the future of cannabis? You tell me.
Yeah, hi. So, okay. So, I mean, I heard you that, you know, there has been, of course, and I think we all agree that, you know, overspending, let's say, in the cannabis in the US has been certainly an issue. Also in Canada, a lot of value has been burned. However, let's say, if we analyze maybe the last 20, 30 years, every new industry, software, IT, now artificial intelligence, electrical battery, whatever. So the reality is that the US is generating the leading companies, and Europe is very good at, you know, protecting consumers, you know, and from a regulatory point of view. But in the end, the US is always kind of dominating the new industries thanks to this huge flow of capitals and propension to innovation, disruptive innovation. So do you see any reasons for which the cannabis sector in Europe should be, or at global level, should be a different industry as compared to all the other new industries? So why do you expect the sector not to be dominated by US companies in the next 10 years.
Spanish haze is amazing. If you've ever smoked amnesia haze grown in Spain, you know why the United States won't dominate the entire industry. No, sorry, go ahead.
I think the farmer in the US has missed the opportunity of cannabis, and farmer in Europe has an opportunity to really generate some good quality research into what works and what doesn't, whereas in America, they've just completely forgotten about it. They've glossed over it because you can just go to the shop and buy what you want, or move to another state and buy what you want if you want it, and it's been left in the hands of the consumer, and farmer just doesn't care over there. And Europe has an opportunity to really excel there, and I don't know that the US is going to catch up.
Going back to the idea that we're beginning to see sort of regional profiles and expertise in the cannabis industry, arguably in other industries as well, but maybe more prominently in the cannabis industry because it's like this controlled environment that we can all sort of really like look at as it's happening very quickly. I would say Europe has many advantages. I mean, beyond, you know, the research and farming research being the operative word there. When you look at health and beauty and food and beverage, look at where Europe stands in terms of consumer packaged goods. I mean, some of the largest conglomerates come out of here. You look at L'Oreal and all these guys that have really led the way, and the US is barely touching. So I think it's about going back and thinking about what is the talent and expertise that already exists, and how does that get applied to the cannabis industry, and then how does the regional industry positions, in this case Europe, to compete at a global level with other regions. I mean, it comes down to that. So Europe has as much of an opportunity as Latin America or Africa. Well, maybe those are not a great example, but they could also have an opportunity when it comes to low-cost farming, where they could really produce the lowest cost, high quality cultivation of hemp, for instance. I'm giving an example. It really is going back to what is your talent, what is your expertise, how do you capitalize on it by sticking to it.
One more question.
Last question, yeah, right here.
Okay. Hi, guys. I'm Nikki from CSL in China. So I have a question. What has the cannabis companies done in the last 3 years that made most of the company lose money sustainably, especially the public companies in North America, like Canopy, Tilray? The share has dropped like a shit. So is there any lessons that European market actually can learn from it?
Absolutely. That's exactly why we pushed all our chips here in Europe and the MCO model. What happened in the US, and I'll speak to that because I've invested more in the US than in Canadian companies, but having a government put pressure, having the wrong scheduling on this drug by overtaxing at a state level, not allowing access to proper banking. I mean, there's no reason why Goldman Sachs isn't able to go make investments in the cannabis space, but it's because of our backwards laws that we have here. If Europe and really ultimately the globe, this takes the right steps now and takes the right actions. And when I hear things that slow down here, I know it frustrates everybody. Oh, you know, this set us back. No, it really makes us keeps us from making mistakes. Right now, the mistakes that we've learned in the US, the implosion of, let's call it, the stocks in Canada, you gotta have a company that has earnings. You know, in any boom of a marketplace, tech stocks, telecom stocks, biomed stocks, whatever, those can only ride on a boom for so long. Eventually, you have to have the earnings behind that. That's why I believe the opportunity is here. I believe the opportunity is here now. And I believe that the opportunity for investments, and I mean, we partnered with a pharma company. You know, I think to jump on that as well of what can happen now when you have, where pharma companies can really be in business with you, versus, let's call it, what happens in the US, where only a handful of monopolies get that opportunity. I think the sky's the limit here. So again, when I'm optimistic, I'm not just a little optimistic, I'm all in optimistic. So I think you have a great question. We've learned everything that can go wrong there. You name it, it's gone wrong. Now we have an opportunity really to monopolize through those thoughts and now capitalize properly.
Fantastic, thank you so much.